I am Robert Stainton with NativState. I'm sorry Tim can't be here. He's a fantastic speaker. I've not given a presentation in quite some time, so this will be fun. We are an Arkansas-based company. We hung our shingle out early last year, and our major focus is reaching out to smaller forest landowners and aggregating them into larger projects. This gives smaller acreage owners the opportunity to participate in these carbon markets that they may not normally have. And I guess that's what that says there. We've got a great team that we've put together. Several foresters, economists. I'm an engineer, so I'm doing the modeling, taking the data the foresters collect and modeling and preparing the reports. Let's see. So what we're trying to do is give these landowners an opportunity to maybe, instead of maybe aggressively harvesting their timber, clear cutting, give them a sustainable management plan and kind of help offset some of the lost revenue that they would get from an aggressive harvest schedule with carbon credits. And the objective being to increase timber value and property values and enhance wildlife and improve water quality for landowners. We talked a little bit about wildlife just a few moments ago. We think that there is room within our program we'll get into that a little bit. There's our mission to bring economics and scale to stewardship for generations by investing in communities where we live and work. We are currently operating in the states that you see here, as well as we just signed our first landowner down in the boot heel of Missouri, and we've been engaging with folks over in Oklahoma as well. So trying to get out there and interact with as many folks as we can. And some of what our program offers to landowners is once we've entered into a carbon agreement with them, we will have foresters go out. We will collect a forest inventory, and all of our forest owners will get a forest management plan, something they can use to help them determine how to manage their forest moving forward. They will be enrolled in a sustainability program. Primarily, our focus is the American tree farm system because it has the most you should do this, you should do that, not you shall do this, you shall do that. It gives the most flexibility to the landowners with what their goals are for their property. And we're doing this as turnkey. We're engaging with the landowners. There's different ways to do it depending upon the size of the landowner. But for the most part, we're acting as the project proponent. We are doing all of the inventory, the forest certification, the mathematics, the submittal to the registry. We'll talk about the registry we're using in just a moment. And then as well as going out and marketing and selling these credits to the end user. And we do all this at no cost to the landowner. And the idea is to, let's see if we can't work on our habitat, create a legacy, jobs, co-benefits, climate, water, family. So these are some of our kids here. I've got two standing next to the cypress tree, and the other three there are our founders' kids. Let's see. So one of the important things for us is we don't want to put everybody in the same box. We want to engage with every landowner and find out something that really works for them, or their goals and objectives for the property. And we may find through this discussion, if their goal is to plant trees and harvest them as a crop, 2x4s or whatever, then carbon program probably is not right for them. I mean, they're looking to maximize their timber asset, and not that there's anything wrong with that. some folks have a different goal vision for their property. Let's see, what's some important points here? It's probably okay. Let me get into a little bit more details about our particular program. As we said earlier, we're trying to, you know, bring these smaller landowners, give them a place to take a product to market they would not otherwise have. We have over 18,000 acres listed with the American Carbon Registry at this point in time. It doesn't have credits ready for sale yet, but that's in progress. And we're talking to over 200,000 acres worth of landowners. We've got a lot of interest in the program. And so Rob, those show counties that we've engaged in talking to folks about in Arkansas. I've seen this presentation. I'm going to go to this slide first. I'm going to go back to that slide because this kind of walks us through, you know, some of the steps that we go through at NativState. So, you know, the first thing we would do is when we engage a landowner is talk about the feasibility of their project. You know, we can provide them an estimate based off of the U.S. Forest Service forest inventory analysis of what the carbon credit potential is on their property and what that looks like in dollars for them. And then after we talk about them, find out what they want to do, this is what are their goals and objectives, then and if we're compatible, then we'll enter into a carbon agreement with them. At that point in time, we will go out and do a full carbon inventory on their property. That's a matter of establishing, you know, plots, the plot densities, depending upon the size of the property. But we want to make sure that we adequately characterize that for every landowner. So if it's a 100-acre piece of property, there may be 20 plots. If it's a 1,000-acre piece of property, there may only be 50. But we want to make sure that we're statistically within 90% confidence interval that we're adequately capturing a resource for that landowner. We could talk into more detail exactly about what the plots look like if y'all are interested, but in the interest of moving this thing forward, we'll skip that now. So we'll model that, put together all the information. We'll submit the ACR. Now the ACR is the American Carbon Registry. We've elected to use those as our registry because they seem to have the most rigid standards of the programs available in the United States. We are mostly engaged in their voluntary program. And so that means we're not going to be selling credits into California where they have a mandatory program. We will be selling, you know, mostly to corporate companies, you know, folks like that who want to, you know, offset their emission. We do feel like that that buying credits is the third choice. It's a process. We feel like any company should look to avoid the emissions they can, minimize those that they can, and then finally it's purchase offsets then to mitigate for what's left. It's very similar to the stream and the wetland mitigation process. It's very, very similar, which some of y'all may be more familiar with. And then after we got everything submitted, we're third-party validated and verified, and that's why that fifth step's highlighted. It's a really, really important part of this particular program because you have a registry like the American Carbon Registry that sets the methodologies and the standards that everybody has to follow. And so as you do that, then we'll put everything together. They'll have another third party come behind us and validate our work and say, yep, we agree, your math looks good, your baseline conditions look good. And then they will recommend to the ACR that credits be released. At that point in time, credits can be released. We can take those and market them directly to the end user. What is the time? No, I should go back up. What does the timing look like? Well, you know, getting a landowner to contract is often a very time-consuming thing. We approach very few people who say, "Yep, sign me up right away." They've got a lot of questions. So that obviously varies, but the work that we do before we go and start talking about getting it validated, it's about 3 to 6 months, depending upon the size of the property. Listing is relatively quick. Getting the verifier, the validator out there behind us is a time process, and then ultimately getting them through that process and getting credits released. So we're telling most of our landowners between 12 and 18-month process. You know, if we're looking at bottomland hardwoods in Arkansas, we've got, you know, for improved forest management programs, there are 2 options. I'm sorry. We have a deferred harvest program, and that's where you just leave it as is. You don't cut anything. You just let the forest grow. And then a select cut where we're actually, you know, we're looking at being able to harvest some of that timber. And folks who are really big into deer, they may want that ability so they can thin a few spots here and there to open up some, put some light on the ground and get some, you know, different vegetation in there for those critters. So we do provide a lease bonus, upfront lease bonus once a carbon agreement is signed for $10 an acre. And the way we pay is on a royalty structure. It's and the way that works is, well, for properties under 2,500 acres, the landowner receives a 40% royalty up until credits are up to $20. Now over that, we go 50-50. The reason for 20 is we need to make sure that we cover all of our costs, because not only do we have to develop the project and do the forest inventory and get the verifiers out there to do that, we've got to do that every 5 years. The project term is 40 years. So it takes a fair amount of capital to do that. So we are on those size properties, that's 40% up to $20, and then it flips to 50-50. And that's great for the recreational landowners. We talked about you can do some food plots, some cabins. You can do a little bit of thinning in there, timber stand improvement, nothing commercial. For the most part, those programs are, you know, they just agree not to harvest. Over on the select cut, the royalty structure is a little bit different. It does generate less credits. We still have to pay for our work. But once again, if credit prices go over $20, then it flips to a 50-50 royalty. The landowner still keeps all the revenue from timber, from the timber income. And so we're going to cut a percentage of the stand growth or the initial inventory. We're looking at the main thing with either of these programs is at the end of the project term that you have the same amount stocking or biomass that you had as when you started. And the point is to keep that carbon sequestered for the 40 years. And, you know, I think that 40 years is a long time, but
you say
40? Yes, sir, is the project term. And but the goal and objective there is to have a significant and meaningful benefit. And in my head, I'm kind of thinking, if we haven't really gotten a decent handle on this whole climate thing or energy transition or whatever you want to call it, wherever it is we're going in 40 years, then I'm not exactly sure where we're going to be. That's a personal opinion. So a little bit of talk about carbon markets. Dr. Ellen did a good job of talking about some of this. Compliance markets. That's the European, over in Europe and California. That's mandated that those companies have to participate. We're mostly dealing in the voluntary carbon space right now, so nobody's required to do it. Let's see. So we got that. The forest-based carbon credits are nature-based. I mean, they've got a lot of bang for their buck. We can kind of look. I think you'll see a slide that Dr. Ellen showed. It's this one. There's a lot of different ways out there to sequester carbon or generate carbon credits, but forestation and natural forest management provide the most bang for the buck. You know, you've got your direct air capture, and they're taking that, pumping it in the ground, and those technologies may get better over time, but right now it costs a lot of money to build one of those machines and pump that stuff down the hole. This slide here talks about potential investments, you know, moving into the future and where the opportunities are. And as you can see, we've highlighted there, between now and 2030, we're looking at, you know, Goldman Sachs is saying there would be $2 trillion invested into this space. It's a lot of money. Let's see. These are just some charts that kind of show where credit prices are going. The report that I got today, credit prices recently were up a little bit over $14 forest-based carbon credits. With all the stuff that's happening in the world, they are a commodity. They've dropped a little bit. The last number I saw yesterday was about $11.50 a credit for things that are credits that are being developed to the ACR registry. And so, but they are a commodity. The price will fluctuate. And so that's something that we have to keep in mind. And then here's a little slide that mentions, you know, who are our biggest emitters. You've got, you know, over there in the upper right-hand corner. I mean, it's kind of who we would expect: mining and oil refineries. Construction materials in the upper left-hand quadrant is high. I don't know if I can point to that or if y'all can see it, but that's, I think, mostly from cement manufacturing. It's they can release a lot of CO2 and make it see that. And then, you know, this is kind of a little bit of idea where people say they're going. You know, BlackRock, Larry Fink, Dr. Ellen talked a little bit about, I believe, about environmental, social governance, and what's driving these corporations to make their decisions. And that's what's a little bit different from the early 2000s, when there wasn't what we wanted to do good, but there wasn't that market driver. Now you've got people saying, you know, we need you to take care of this. We need you to be responsible, and that's what our shareholders want. And so when that message starts getting out there, then companies listen. We've seen Shell saying they're going to be net zero by 2050. Walmart is saying they're going to do their part. Chevron. This Civitas is supposedly the first carbon neutral oil and gas company. So that's something that would have been unheard of, you know, not all that long ago. You know, there's more stuff about different types of credit prices in the bottom right hand corner there. We are primarily looking this, you know, in that $12 range is what we're looking at today for to sell one of our carbon credits. Just a little bit more market research that really indicates that there's a lot of growth. So in the market for these credits. And then and this slide is some considerations. You know, you have to know that it's a 40-year project term. That's done. You have a 20-year crediting period. That's how we initially evaluate them. At the end of that time, you can reevaluate the baseline scenario that Dr. Allen was talking about, and figure out, you know, do a new credit release schedule. And so we've talked about some of these things, you know, earlier as well. Dr. Allen talked about intentional reversals, you know, so intentional and unintentional reversals. Talked about how we would enroll landowners in a sustainability program. And a key component of this whole program is this third party validator and verifier. Now, can't quite. what's next? And some other stuff, other words. I talked about market volatility. You know, different programs have different pros and cons. I mean, I think that that what we're saying is that the folks that we're talking to, as far as selling credits to, they really like this program. That they like that it's that it has a significant permanence associated with it, and the fact that it's a 40-year project term. But there's different ways of doing it, and you know, hopefully there's a spot for everybody in this space. Keep an eye on large industries. We talked a little bit about, you know, stockholders and what's driving all these things. You know, I don't know at what point in time the government may decide they want to get in and run the ship. I think that what we're doing right now is getting good traction. Hopefully we can still have some type of voluntary marketplace, but we'll see. And then I think that Dr. Ellen mentioned some stuff on number 5 as well. We don't necessarily know fully what the future is going to hold, and how well some of the WRE easements and just different programs affect whether or not a landowner can generate credits on their property. Let's see. And here, you know what, she had a list at the end. We do too. I mean, these are kind of common questions we get asked by landowners. You know, what's the term? We talked about how it's 40 years, and you know, it's got to be right for that particular landowner. We've talked about how we are we're running our program for the American Carbon Registry, and they have their standards and methodologies, and we're a third party validated and verified. No cost to the landowner. We do all this on their behalf. If you decide to sell your land, the carbon program goes with the land for the project term. And similar to a mineral lease, you could elect to hold that back and keep it yourself, or you could let it go with the land. Talk about whether or not there's a penalty for early termination, and it kind of depends. I mean, if the landowner decides they want to get out of the program, they would have to replace any carbon credits that they had sold off of their land. So if the markets should the markets go to zero, they would have to replace their offsets with credits that were $0 or near $0. So that's a market factor. However, if the carbon credits still had a high value and they decided to get out early, they would have to repay the value of that, or replace those credits, and that would just be the market value at the time that they decide to sell their property or get out of the contract. So it's not really something that we encourage, but there is a way. It might be painful, but there can be a way to get out of it. We don't really have a minimum or maximum acreage. If it's less than 100 acres, we would hope, we're really looking for that to be closer to another project that's maybe a little bit larger to kind of help, you know, spread the costs out. But we've got some parcels signed up that are 20. We talked about what happens in the case of a natural event. There's that buffer pool that's there that can replace those credits. Okay, how are payments figured and where are they paid? So once we sell credits, we notify the landowner that the credits have sold on their property, and they receive their royalty payment within 60 days of closing that agreement with that purchaser. What happens if prices go up over time, and we certainly feel like they will, and that's how come we've set in that index at $20 to make sure we can cover all of our costs, and then past that we split all that with the landowner 50-50. Yeah, with most of these projects, will I make additional money as my trees grow throughout the term of the project? The answer is yes. For a well-established forest, when this project kicks off, you basically get credit for the growth of that forest up to that time. So if it's, 80, 100-year-old forest, you get to take advantage of that. And that's your stock. And you compare that to the baseline as you talked about. After the signing of the carbon agreement moving forward, then you get annual credits based off of the growth of that forest. So before the carbon agreement is signed, you get credit for everything up to that point. And then after the carbon agreement is signed, then you get credit for there moving forward. So if it's an IFM project, most often those payments will be front loaded because of the fact that the forest has had many, many years to grow. And then after that, the payments will be a little bit less because it's just based off the growth. And if you're in a selective cut program, you can sell your timber. You don't have to, if you do decide that you want to be in a selective cut program, you don't have to cut any timber if you don't want to. But if you do, you keep all the proceeds from that. You can enroll only a portion of your property. You do have to put all of your property, forested acres, in one of those sustainable management programs, the Tree Farm System, Forest Stewardship Council, or the Forest Sustainability, FSI's Forest Sustainability. I think that, yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, can you reforest open areas and count them as well? You sure can. Who pays for the development of enforcement management plans? NativState does. And that last thing, again, Dr. Ellen talked about that. With the new ACR has just updated their IFM methodology, and what they say is, if the project has been enrolled in one of those programs for less than 1 year, and you have and maintain all timber rights associated with that property, then it could still be enrolled in one of those programs. It says less than 1 year before or 3 years after. I don't quite understand the 3 years after, except that if you enroll 3 years after, you may have to reevaluate your baseline, taking into consideration any of the conditions of the easement. So that's a question that I need to follow up with the ACR on and get a good answer for. And I believe it's mostly the end of this presentation.
That last question.
Well, that's what we're just trying to talk about. If it's been enrolled less than a year, then you can.
In the program itself.
If it's been enrolled, yes, in CRP or WRE for less than a year, then you can still, and you have the full timber management rights associated with the property, because you have to have the right to be able to go out and get that timber asset. So I don't know exactly what those agreements look like. I've seen different agreements. I've seen conservation easements on mitigation banks that give the landowner full timber rights. When I did that before I came to NativState, none of ours had that in there. So it just depends upon the conditions of the easement. So, and I appreciate y'all putting up with me for the last however long it was. There's some tenets of our company.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.